It all starts with a timer. That's the beauty of speedrunning. It doesn't matter how much you suck at the game. If you're playing it with a timer on, you are speedrunning. It really is that simple. In Portal 2, there's something called challenge mode. In challenge mode, you can replay a single level, and the game will track the number of portals the player shoots, as well as the time spent in the chamber, essentially adding that timer that is oh so necessary to speedrunning. For many people, challenge mode is a gateway into the world of speedrunning. It usually starts by just trying to beat your friends in a couple of your favorite levels, but very quickly, competition can reach a global scale, and speedrunners around the world clash to get the fastest time on the challenge mode levels. But here's a fun fact. Not all of the levels in Portal 2 are available in challenge mode. In total, there are 62 levels in Portal 2, but only 51 of those levels are able to be played in challenge mode. Valve, the creators of Portal 2, decided that 11 levels weren't worthy of playing with a timer on, plunging these levels into speedrun irrelevancy. And while it sounds like a terrible thing to exclude certain levels from a speedrun mode, it wasn't actually that outrageous, as most of these levels were either cutscenes with little gameplay, like the Tube Ride level, or incredibly simple chambers, like the laser intro puzzle in Chapter 2. But despite Valve's decision to remove them, speedrunners would put a timer on these levels anyway, as by modifying a file conveniently named challenge_maplist.txt, the player could play these forbidden levels in challenge mode. While many speedrunners would try their best to run these new levels, for the most part, they were very boring speedruns. It seemed that Valve was right in excluding these levels, as most were incredibly straightforward with no potential for creativity. However, one of those levels was very different from the rest. The first level of Chapter 9, titled Finale 1, was one of the 11 levels originally left out from challenge mode, and while it might look like a cutscene at first glance, it actually holds one of Portal 2's most absurd skips, and this is the story of how it came to be. Finale 1 is a pretty simple level. It starts out with a long entrance corridor entering a decoy test chamber. Once the player steps on the faith plate, the walls open up, and the player is launched out of the confines of the chamber. This is when the level starts to get boring, as the player is sent into a very slow funnel, and has no choice but to wait patiently as they float across the level. After the wait, the player is launched into the iconic meeting with Wheatley, and has to wait even longer, until they can use the nearby conversion gel to place portals and escape from the Crusher Trap. Once on the move again, the player navigates across some catwalks, before further progressing by landing a narrow fling. Then Chell can finish out the level by portaling over another Crusher Trap. The level will then fade to a loading screen, marking the end of Finale 1. Finale 1 is a great level, and almost all Portal 2 players remember the Trap Faithplate and Wheatley Crusher scenes. But for speedrunners, these familiar scenes are huge problems, as over 60% of the level is just spent waiting, with seemingly no way to speed it up. So it kind of makes sense that such a level would be excluded from a speedrun mode, as at first glance, the level seemed really boring. The first handful of runs for Finale 1 were pretty stale. The first world record run for the chamber was done in March of 2014 by a runner named Fallen, who achieved a time of 118.26. The run was pretty straightforward, with clean bunny hops out of the elevator towards the faith plate, a whole lot of waiting, quick portals, and some fast catwalk navigation. Here is the only skip that runners would use in the level. Instead of walking all of the way up the stairs to do the fling, runners would instead walk partially up the stairs and then jump onto the railing of the catwalk to make their way over to the fling. This saved around 3 seconds, and after some portals to the ending door, Fallen finished at 1 minute and 18 seconds. Even though this run was far from perfect, the record would end up standing for almost 3 months, as the chamber did not seem like fun to play, so many runners just didn't want to compete on Finale 1. In June of 2014, Fallen's time would finally be bested, as Xipe would achieve a time of 118.16. There really wasn't anything special about Xipe's run, a bit cleaner movement, cutting corners a bit tighter, and just general execution improvements. In fact, over the next 4 years of competition, Finale 1 would see 8 new world records, from Xipe, Undead, Desi, and Deltos. All of these runs use the exact same route, with extremely minor execution details setting them apart. but with how simple the chamber was, it seemed like runs were nearing perfection. But nothing came closer to perfection than Xipe's 116.69. Xipe had great hops into the decoy chamber, excellent catwalk movement, and even threw in a re-portal at the end of the level to get a speed boost out of the final portal. All of this culminated into what seemed like a near-perfect run for Finale 1. In fact, Xipe was so ahead of the competition that the second place time was nearly half a second slower. So for those who wanted to claim the Finale 1 world record, it was back to the drawing board. It would be near impossible to beat Xipe on execution, so how could the chamber become faster? Well, you'd expect that the very best Portal 2 speedrunners would be able to think with portals in some way, but the portal gun is barely useful in Finale 1, as the amount of portalable surfaces is very limited. So the solution for speeding up Finale 1 isn't with portals, but rather with a cube. In the decoy test chamber, there's a FrankenTurret bouncing in the center of the room. By bunny hopping past the trapped faith plate, the player can instead land on the faith plate in the center pool of acid, grab the cube, and with some good air strafing, they can land back on the normal part of the chamber. With this cube now at our disposal, we can perform a glitch called cube hopping. In Portal 2, physics objects like cubes don't collide with the player while the object is held. This means that if a player wants to jump on top of a cube, they have to let go of it first. However, speedrunners can still bypass this limitation and jump off of a cube in mid-air. By letting go of a cube, jumping off of it, and then grabbing it again in quick succession, the player can perform a mid-air bunny hop off of a cube. This is called a cube hop. Cube hops are really hard to perform, but with the FrankenTurret from the decoy test chamber, it was theoretically possible to use cube hops to save a ton of time in Finale 1. In fact, all the way back in 2011, within the first month of Portal 2's release, by using cheats, speedrunner CoolKid proved that cube hopping could be used to land on a railing above Wheatley's monitor, being able to skip waiting for the conversion gel to fall, which could save up to 8 seconds in a speedrun of Finale 1. Due to the sheer difficulty of the trick, the theory was swept under the rug, and Xipe's world record would stand tall. But that would change on May of 2020, where one runner, named Turmoil, would set out to prove a certain theory. Finishing at 116.26, Turmoil had beaten the world record by only 0.4 of a second, but made Portal 2 history in the process, as he became the first runner to pull off the cube hop strat in real time. As more runners attempted it, it seemed that the strat was less skill-based than expected, and actually involved a lot of luck, as you were more likely to get the skip just by letting go of the cube, spamming jump, and hoping for the best. But within only 3 hours of Turmoil achieving his time, another runner had already won the lottery. ZMG, also known as Zach, had already dethroned Turmoil by a full second. But even this run wouldn't stand for long, as within a week, runners had already discovered a somewhat consistent setup for the cube hop. This improved version of the cube hop strat would fling the runner straight over Wheatley's monitor, instead of landing on the catwalk, which would save a significant amount of time. This strat was dubbed the franken-footlong. The unorthodox name comes from the humorous fact that the strat only works when the FrankenTurret's leg is extended, or when its foot is long, hence the name franken-footlong. Also because, for some reason, Portal 2 speedrunners really like naming tricks after food. With this new setup in the picture, Zach would lower the record all the way down to a 110.26, and while a sub 110 time seemed in reach, it would take a different runner to cross that barrier. Xipe, now equipped with the franken-footlong, was prepared to go on a rampage on Finale 1. On May 18th, 2020, Xipe would beat the world record 6 times in about a span of 5 hours, lowering the record to a time of 108.83. His runs featured incredible movement and precise execution, pushing the chamber closer and closer to its limits with the newly found route improvement. But the franken-footlong skip still wasn't quite set in stone. runners created a variation of the route where the player would slide off of Wheatley's monitor while keeping the cube with them into the next section. It's common knowledge that bringing a cube or a physics object through an emancipation grill will fizzle it, but speedrunners can actually abuse this simple mechanic. After fizzling an item, the item will play an animation and disappear, but that animation actually has a weird collision hitbox. The player can get a small vertical or horizontal boost from the decaying fizzled object, known as a Fizzler boost. In Finale 1, the player can use the preserved FrankenTurret to perform a Fizzler boost, getting just enough height to clear the railing and fling to the end of the level, saving around 2 seconds. Xipe was quick to improve the record using the Fizzler boost. In the span of about 1 hour on May 22nd, Xipe managed to beat the world record 3 times, ultimately achieving a world record time of 106.29. And it seems like we're back at the start of our story again, because this 106 run was very clean. It had incredible execution all around, and it really seemed like Xipe had gotten every last millisecond out of this chamber. Xipe's run would stay unchallenged for another year, and since runners couldn't beat him on execution, it was once again back to the drawing board. This time, Nidboy created a new theory for a Finale 1 strategy. This whole time, we've been talking about skipping the interaction with Wheatley, and while that is a long part of the chamber, we actually spend more time in the funnel ride leading up to the interaction. In one of the most absurd route theories I've ever seen, Nidboy set out to skip the funnel ride in its entirety. Starting just like the franken-footlong strat, the player would get the FrankenTurret in the decoy test chamber, but this time, they would use it almost immediately and bounce off of the cube after hitting the second faith plate. This would change the player's trajectory to hit the right wall, and after stopping themselves with the cube, they can land on this catwalk that runs parallel to the funnel. If the player could somehow get the perfect trajectory to land here, they could hop along the catwalk for a bit, and then perform 2 more cube hops to hit the panel that flings them towards Wheatley, completely skipping the funnel ride. This route, named Funnelless, is absurd. It involves so much precision to block the path of the aerial faith plate with the cube, and then combined with the 2 cube jumps at the end, it seemed near impossible. The strategy could be up to 3 seconds faster than the franken-footlong strat, and more importantly, you could potentially combine the 2 strategies for some massive time save. This trick truly seemed impossible. It was thought to be a theory, or a task route, that humans couldn't reasonably perform, but that didn't stop runners from attempting it anyways. Between multiple top runners, many hours were spent trying to pull off the funnelless strat in a run. After a lot of tinkering, the strat seemed much more feasible to perform, but it was still unbelievably difficult. Many runs got close, some even died right at the end. But finally, on the 27th of February, Zach pulled out this run.
Make a video.
Oh my god, oh my god.
Oh.
Dude, oh my god, I'm so nervous.
One minute and 5.53 seconds. It was once again a Finale 1 world record by barely half of a second, but Zach achieved one of the most impressive feats in Portal 2 speedrunning by performing the funnelless strategy. Maybe one day, a runner will land both the funnelless and franken-footlong strategies in a speedrun. While it is theoretically possible, the FrankenTurrets leg usually isn't extended when performing the funnelless strategy, so it makes the current franken-footlong setup impossible to perform. A runner named Angry Snack showed that these 2 routes could be combined, and performed the franken-footlong in tandem with a partial funnelless route, by using the cube redirect to skip a super small portion of the funnel ride. Snack's run managed to beat out Zach by 1/10 of a second, but Zach would somehow manage to perform the funnelless route again, achieving a time of 104.60, which is where the record stands today. If a funnelless run is performed with the franken-footlong skip, it might be one of the most impressive Portal 2 speedruns ever, but the fact that it's possible in the first place really goes to show you how far Finale 1 has come as a level. If speedrunners never put a timer on this level, it would have been forgotten. But because they did anyways, the chamber now holds one of the most impressive and challenging speedrun skips in the entire game. It goes to show you that it's never worth writing out something that seems too simple at first glance.